Hey, welcome back to A Conversation With. My name is Philip DeFranco, and today we're having a conversation with Mike Birbiglia. Mike, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me.
I like your setup looks. Mine's like a set. Yours actually looks like you use it, which is good.
Yeah. This is, we've had an production office in Providence, Rhode Island for many years. My brother Joe lives here. My producer Peter lives here, and I live in Brooklyn. And since the pandemic, we basically took this office and we turned it into a little studio. You can see we got camera one is over here. So I do these virtual comedy shows. Camera one is here, and I call that story time. And then I go over to camera two, which is called new jokes. This is all a wall of new jokes. And then camera three, which is where we were to start, is the slow round, where I ask questions like, do you have memories from childhood? All these things that I talk about on my podcast, smells that you remember from your childhood, memories on a loop, the times you remember laughing the hardest. And then camera four is sort of the wild card. You can see Peter over there at the control panel. And that's my life, Phil. I used to be a comedian, and now I'm whatever the hell this is.
Yeah, you're like merging this in between. I've seen comedians go into podcasting. Obviously, you have your podcast as well. We had Daniel Sloss on recently. He does like live streams, and he also, much like you, had planned to release a book this last year. like that was gonna be. That was completely fine.
Yeah, this is our book, the new one, which I'll bring it closer to. I'll bring it closer to this camera two. This is the new and painfully true stories from a reluctant dad, with poems by J. Hope Stein, who is my wife.
Would you say that's kind of close to the definitive edition, director's cut of your last comedy special? Because I was listening to it right before we hopped on.
There's definitely the overarching story of it is the bones of it are the same, but then it has just a lot of stories along the way that give a lot of color. That some of it's dark and some of it's very funny and has jokes, but it is very raw. I mean, I know you're a dad, and it's like you have these dark moments of the soul where you just go like, wow, I didn't know I was going to feel that way. But then you also have these moments of joy that are unimaginable. And I try to, with the book, sort of include all of that, which is, I don't know if you found this when you talk about being a dad, but it's like, it's the third rail that I didn't know was a third rail before I started discussing it.
In what ways? Do you feel like people have just a big reaction?
What I've noticed is there are a lot of parents out there. You talk about your sleepwalking disorder, like I have, and people go, oh, okay, well, you jumped through a window. That's interesting. I've never done that. You go like, I'm a dad, and sometimes it sucks. People are like, no, it doesn't. I'm a dad too. You know what I mean?
I've never gotten that pushback. Every time I share that, they're like, thank you for sharing it. Actually, one of the first things I was going to say to you was I appreciated, I think it was in the New York Times. It was like the 75 artists, 7 questions.
Oh yeah, that was it. Yeah, it was fun.
I'll read it because I loved it. It was like, we took my 5-year-old daughter, Una, snow tubing. One time, Una and I went down the hill together, and the snow tube just kept going and going and going. And I realized we were about to slide into this little pond, which is not the best place to bring your snow tube. So my brain went into panic mode. You were able to ultimately stop. Kid doesn't realize how close she may have come to maiming or death. And I was like, yes, thank you. I appreciate that. I would never.
And I say, in the final line of it is it's a metaphor for how we treat kids in the pandemic, but you only tell them what they need to know.
Yes, 1,000%. And I was just like, most of us have no idea. Anytime any parent gets like judgy or critical of someone that's like, you know what, it's not a fairy tale, I get furious. I get so furious.
Yes.
Especially because as a dad, you get the most credit for doing nothing.
That's true.
I
That's
appreciate
true.
it. I'll share a picture pushing my kid on a swing that I didn't build. I didn't do anything magical, and they're just like, "You're the best. I wish you were my dad." I'm like, "No, you don't." I was like, I remember another thing that you talk about in your special in your book was like just the lack of sleep. This, though you said it was more on your wife's side, but with the first baby, we tried to do that thing where we took turns before I realized I was the
Yes.
inferior parent. And like having a baby cry in your face, just not stopping to the point where I was like, okay, I understand where maybe my parents had rage. I'm going to put you down for a second. This isn't getting better. I'm going to go outside and I'm going to scream. I'm going to scream and
Yes.
separate myself
Oh my
from the
gosh.
situation because the instinctual nature of being a parent, you realize where maybe your parent, I don't know what your relationship was with your parents, but your parents' missteps and like, okay, I understand they were just human. They weren't the villain in some book. I probably wasn't some angel. But I know I don't want to do what they did.
Yes. No, of course. I mean, that's how you go into the whole thing is I'm going to do this thing right that my parents did wrong. And then when you have a child, you go, okay, well, it was a little more complicated than that.
When would you say?
I mean, I don't know.
When was the moment that maybe you were a kid or maybe you were an adult that you realized, oh, my parents are not perfect. They're imperfect.
Oh, that's a great question. What was the moment? I always say, and I say this in the book, but I feel like people always ask you for a moment, but so many things in life are actually a series of moments that form an epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard for me to pinpoint, but I could try to throw a few of them down.
Okay.
But it's like I feel like when I was like 5 or 6 years old, my oldest sister Gina was 16. My sisters were in high school basically when I was my daughter's age now.
Mm-hmm.
And I would see these things where like my mom would be like, you have to clean your room. And they would be like, no, and then she'd be like, you have to clean your room. It is a mess. And I have this distinct memory of my mom started taking their clothes from their floor and walking them across the street and putting them in the sewer. I'm not making this up, in the sewer. I mean, because she had just passed her point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my sisters had always employed me as sort of their assistant or their intern. And so they're like, Mike, take these clothes and bring them back to the bedroom. And so it was like an assembly line, like from I Love Lucy, of like my mom bringing clothes to the sewer and me bringing them back into the bedroom. And it's like, I can't tell you how many things like that I have from my childhood where that led me to the point of the book and the show is this idea of like, I never wanted to have a child, partly for years. And of course I do now. My daughter's 6 and it is so much joy along with it being challenging. I never want to have a kid, partly because I saw my parents do it and I was like, that doesn't seem fun. And then I got, and that seems hard. And there's so many, I remember my sister saying to my mom, like, I hate you. And I was like, oh God, that's like a real thankless job being a parent. It's like a Ponzi scheme, you just like pay into it. And then eventually your money's gone and whatever. It just seemed like a bad deal.
Yeah. But I mean, for you, what was not being one of the first out, was your upbringing easier were you the third child?
I was youngest of four. And I do think that there was, my sister Patty at one point, I think she got so mad because she thought that I got away with everything because I was the fourth and like it was they were barely paying attention to me. And I think she said to my mom, like, you let him do whatever he wants. You never would have let me do that kind of thing. But so yeah. I mean, I had a real laissez-faire parenting style from childhood. I used to go out. Well, this whole thing of like free range parenting now they call it, where it's like you let your kids go outside or whatever. That was my whole childhood. My whole childhood was like, come back for dinner.
I wish I had that. Mine was so locked up. It was like I had to have straight A's to go to a friend's house. I was like, why? You don't even like me. You don't even like me. Just let me go to people that like me. But I don't know. I feel like that's like a weird parenting thing because you have like this sense of ownership, and I don't know. It's such a minefield. Like I'm very happy. Did you have a moment where you were like, I forget if you wrote about it or you talked about it. Was there a specific moment you were like, I'm excited about this before the birth? Because for me, I never thought I wanted it. And then I told the story forever ago, but my wife, then girlfriend, uh, monster moment for her, on an April Fool's, tricked me into thinking that she was pregnant. And my
Oh my
surprise reaction,
God.
I know, what a horrible move.
That's
Great.
a pretty extreme.
It's very extreme
prank.
But I think she thought I was gonna be like, oh my God, I'm freaking out. But I surprisingly was very excited about it. I got really pumped, and it was actually my moment of realizing, oh, I would love to do this, and all the reasons of why I want a child. 60% of which were not selfish. I got really pumped about the idea, and then from after that we started trying. But did you have the moment? I forget because it's been a while since I watched a special, because the special came out in like 2019, right?
Yeah, and I feel like it was something Jen wanted to do more than I did at the outset, but then once our goal was to get pregnant, I had this. When she told me she was pregnant, I was just like, yes, and it was, I think it was in our living room in Brooklyn. And I sort of forgot that I didn't want to have a kid. I guess it just sort of erased it momentarily. And I feel like that element of it comes and goes. And it's funny because what my experience of doing the show on Broadway and releasing the book is that, I mentioned like some people have criticisms because everyone either has kids or is a child of a parent, so has strong opinions about parenting. But like, yeah, for the most part, you get people saying, thanks for saying this stuff that feels like we're not allowed to say, which is this idea of like that you don't always connect with your baby in the first 3 months or 6 months. And in my case, the first like 13 months, sometimes it takes years. It's called Painfully True Stories of a Reluctant Dad, but I have at least as many mothers come up to me and say that was their experience too. So it's definitely like a fear that a lot of parents, I think, live with.
Yeah. And I think it helps, like all the criticisms aside, I think it helps because I remember even having it almost feels like there are a lot of fathers that are hungry for that conversation so they don't feel alone with it. I remember going to a doctor's office because I had the flu like 3 years ago, back when people got just colds, and he just unprompted was like, oh, I saw your kid, like, when did you realize you had an emotional attachment? And I was like, what a weird question. You must have been struggling in my head. But and then he shared a similar story. For him, it was 8 months. And I was like, yeah, because it's hard. Because it's like, we didn't carry the baby. All of a sudden, this little gremlin creature that we're supposed to instantly fall in love with. That also, newborn babies are little monsters. They're just like, they don't look like people. It's just it's a little scary for the first, at least the first week. I look back to photos of my children. I'm like, who was that?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, they call it I remember in birthing class, they call it the 4th trimester is the first three months. And it's true. I mean, it's like the first 3 months, the baby is just this sort of animal life form that you have to make sure stays alive. And that's the whole goal.
How is your relationship with your father changed? Because I know that you were talking about like your parents growing up, and then was I reading it, or actually I think it might have been in your book. You talk about your father and emails.
Oh my gosh, but her emails, Phil.
No, yeah.
Because what's funny is I was
going to say
it hasn't come out. It hasn't.
We're doing that thing
yet.
Yeah, go for it.
It hasn't come out yet, but I did an interview with Hillary Clinton for her podcast. So I got to talk to her for an hour, which was really, really wild.
Was it you just shouting, what about your emails for an hour?
What about the emails? It was a weird thing though, because my dad is very much in that, I write about this in the book. He's very much in that conservative media headspace of I don't even know how to describe it. I almost would describe it as like conspiracy theories mainstreamed, which we've witnessed in our time, and certainly there are left-wing conspiracy theorists that are egregious as well. That goes without saying also. But some of the right-wing stuff is so wild that, like, over the years, like, the birth certificate stuff and all of this really insidious stuff where there over the years I've dealt with, and I write about this in the book, and there's a chapter about with my dad, him forwarding these emails to me where it's just simply not true what they say.
Right.
And then, but my parents, they're 80, my parents. They didn't grow up on email. They didn't grow up on the idea. If they see something on a screen, they believe it's probably true,
Especially if it's in all caps.
Exactly. If it's in all caps, it must be true. But yeah, and so my dad and I, it's a very sad thing for me. I say this is like, it's a very sad thing that my dad and I have sort of had strained, I would say very strained relationship in the last like decade or so because of the polarization of politics in the country.
Yeah, well, because I found it interesting because you talked about like, I think it was you were speaking to your dad, but you said, but Dad, I'm not the media, but kind of the media in the sense of like the people that like a lot of the conspiracy theories, like, because I also something you said I think is valid, right? There are conspiracies on both sides, but I think we just got to stay away from the thought of like, but they're equal.
They're not equal.
Yeah, it's like okay, like you see like a conspiracy theory, and you're like, okay, so Trump might have done something that's like very self-serving, and this is why he did that, and then the other is like, and everyone in Hollywood eats babies. And it's like, oh my God, those aren't two equal things.
And I would bring up as an example, like, if I don't spend my time talking about Lindsey Graham's personal life, or
right.
You know what I mean, like things that might be true about him that are not disclosed, that sure. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in that. A lot of people who, if we wanted to, we could spend time imagining what that might be.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it feels so strange to try to win substantive arguments with, I guess it would be called ad hominem attacks.
Mm-hmm. Would you say the reaction that you've had over the last year has been worse from other parents regarding you talking about being a father, or Trump supporters?
The political stuff? No, that's both bad. The political stuff is by far worse.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I think I'm gonna make a shift on Twitter, which is to say that, because I was very vocal in the last 4 years on Twitter about my political beliefs, and to the point where, political tweets of mine would go viral. And then I think that would be people's introduction to who I am and what I do.
Sure.
And so I would get a lot of the replies that would bum me out would not be, I disagree with you. The replies that would bum me out would be, it's sad that this is what Mike Birbiglia does now instead of comedy. And I was going, oh my gosh, no. I have a show on Broadway, and I have I have a movie that just came out, and you know what I mean? Like I'm writing a book, and a majority of my time is spent on comedy that is personal and has nothing to do with political stuff. And I think that in this moment in history, the way that information exponentializes in ways that are out of your control,
sure,
I can't handle it anymore in relation to this thing that I care so deeply about, which is telling stories that make people feel connected, as opposed to saying things that are inflammatory politically that make people feel farther apart from each other.
Yeah. Well, so I'll stay away from politics, but I do want to say, like,
I don't mind talking about it.
No, I'm not. Yeah, no, I wouldn't shy away from it. I think it's because there are more interesting things to talk about for the next 2.5 to 3 years before we start having to worry about part two. But I do I don't think that a lot of people credit, whether it be people like you or Gaffigan, who like closer to the election had a big kind of like viral moment regarding speaking out, because it's like if you're never political beforehand, you know that you're alienating 50% of your audience. And I think a lot of people don't like expect that people like you, or like when you speak out, you're just like expecting high fives. Like you're a grown person, you understand that I'm going to alienate people, but I imagine you understood that it's like, but it's this important moment. Like, how could it's one of those things? It's like, how could I not? Like, I feel like I'd be going crazy.
I think that's why I want to demarcate this moment and move away from my presence politically in social media, because for those 4 years, I feel like the country was in danger of really dissolving in a way that we previously understood it as having laws and not a king. and not a dictator. And like it's not to say that we were at that point, because we weren't. But I think that we were peeking into a future that could have had that.
Oh yeah, no, and I think there's outside of this conversation, there's a larger issue regarding voting rights and gerrymandering and what the hell is the future is going to look like. But we have a breather for a moment. We have some horrible, hopefully coming to an end.
Yes,
and hopefully just boring calm, so we can get back to just complaining and talking about really stupid and consequential shit. That's right.
The future
I'm looking for.
I hope so.
Hey there, just here with my scheduled shout out to one of today's sponsors, Upstart. And so most of us have credit cards, right? And there is always that one, and you know it. The one with that statement where you're afraid to look to see what that balance is. Right? We've all been there at some point. And if you've been avoiding your debt, 2021 is a new year, and Upstart is here to help you confront it and finally pay it off. It's the fast and easy way to get a personal loan to pay off your debt, and it's all online. Whether it's paying off credit cards, consolidating high-interest debt, or funding personal expenses, over 500,000 people have used Upstart to get a simple fixed monthly payment. And here's how it works. Upstart finds smarter rates with trusted partners because they assess more than your credit score. With a 5-minute online rate check, you can see your rate up front for loans from $1,000 to $50,000. You can even get approved the same day and receive funds as fast as one business day. So if debt is taking over your life, it's time to get a fresh start with Upstart. Find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today by going to upstart.com/DeFranco. That's upstart.com/DeFranco. Do not forget to use our URL or I will fight you, or they won't know that it was us that sent you. Also, loan amounts will be determined based on your credit, income, and certain other information provided in your loan application. So yeah, go to upstart.com/DeFranco. But with that said, let's go back to the podcast.
But to go back to your dad, because obviously, we have different relationships with our parents. What is something, to kind of flip it, what's something that maybe your dad, or we could also include your mom, said to you or did when you were a kid that, you realize, oh, there is actually truth in that now that you're an adult?
Yeah, so there's a thing that my dad has always said to me since I was a kid, and interestingly, it's had different meanings at different stages in my life, which is that his dad always asked him the question, "Are you having any fun?" And that to him that was the sort of the key question to always be asking yourself. And I always thought that was sort of funny coming from someone who never seemed like he was having fun to his son, who also seemed like he was never having any fun. But it is an important question. I think, even, we were talking about snow tubing with my daughter or playing soccer with my daughter today and all that kind of stuff. It's like relishing those moments, I think, is the key to any of it, whether no matter what your situation is in life, is like these little moments where you can interact in a positive way with people you love.
So for you, actually, I mean, what excites you now? Because I mean, you, even when I was going to go through the spiel where I introduce the guests or have them describe themselves, but it's like, just for like people that are unfamiliar, but it's like you're a comedian, writer, you've been on Broadway, you have a movie, or you've been in movies and you made a movie. What do you like? Are you in the place where you just like, I'm an artist, or like, how do you define yourself?
That's exactly it. I'm an artist.
Don't you see my boards?
An artist, Phil. Can't you see? Can't you see my board?
But yeah, I mean, so
Um,
like how do you describe yourself? And then what do you want to do from here? Because obviously, this year has really tested people. You're doing the virtual stuff. I know that you've said
yeah,
even when we get to see each other, you want to continue. Like what's the future look like for you as well?
I think it's just the continuation of like growth and creation. I think that like what has served me well up until now has been not when you do an inventory on your year. My sister Patty said this to me once. When you do an inventory, December 30th on what happened in your year, what's a good approach is not what did I do, but rather what did I learn. And I think that learning is sort of the key facet. So even like this year, we call it the lost year, but a lot of people call it the lost year. But in fact, me and Peter and my brother Joe and our associate Mabel and my director Seth, we figured out how to make an impromptu television studio using things that we had learned from making films and doing stand-up comedy shows and all these things. And nobody knew how to do this virtual comedy shows, but we figured it out. And maybe we'll take things that we learned from that and incorporate it into maybe a video element of the next live show. And essentially, like, I think that and the other thing I feel like this year has really hammered home for me is this idea that there's a charity component or a nonprofit component to literally everything I do now. So like when I do the podcast, we give, I'm working it out, we give a donation to the nonprofit of the guest's choice. And with the virtuals, we give, the final show, we're giving 100% of the proceeds to Texas food banks. And like, we've been trying to give to food banks for all the virtuals. And like, it's really thinking about a little bit more in a holistic sense of like, what are we doing exactly? Like, okay, yes, we're trying to make people laugh, but also like, how can this also serve a larger group of people?
And do you feel like that last sentence is what drives your creation now or always has?
I think that my creation is
Sometimes I word things like an asshole.
I was going to say my creation is a compulsion. It's an obsessive compulsion. It's a problem I can't stop. There's a Conan O'Brien documentary called Conan O'Brien Can't Stop, I think, about him touring the country, and I relate to that 100%. I mean, I no matter what, I pull out my notebook and I'm writing stuff down. You're right. So like that's not going anywhere. I think that the two key things are learning and getting better, and then learning how what you're doing could be serving the greater good, or at very least, like we were talking about politics. I want to move away from politics and more towards the direction of registering voters and letting people decide and participate and try and let them understand the government of the country that we live in better.
So
for a period of time, I was doing this tour in 2018, and then we'd planned it for 2020, but we had to call it off. It was called the Stand Up and Vote Tour. And so it was like on any given show, it would be like, Phoebe Robinson or Aparna Nancherla, Michelle Wolf, like all John Legend did one at UPenn with us. It was really, we put on these great shows, Gary Gulman, and it was just going to schools, registering voters, putting on a comedy show, like really simple. And I take a lot of pride in like little things like that.
And is it because you're having an impact on like the outside world, or do you feel like, because I imagine for comedy, a lot of it, I might be projecting this, a lot of it feels like validation from strangers, right? So like this internal thing you feel, but also because you have like a body of work that includes writing a Broadway show, do you think it's more about other people or what you feel inside at this point, if you're like being honest with yourself?
My experience creating stand-up comedy and solo shows is you're always trying to understand a Venn diagram between what you're thinking and feeling and what you think is funny and makes you laugh. and the Venn diagram of what audiences think is funny or are interested in, and then finding that little wedge right there and working in that space. And so, like, for example, the show that I'm working on next for, knock on wood, Broadway, is called The Old Man and the Pool.
Mhm.
And it's all about aging and sort of coming to grips with the idea that sort of natural causes are around the corner, you know, and what does that mean? And what, and sort of like what I really, my goal with it, and this sort of harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, is like, my goal is to make people laugh for 90 minutes straight about death, about this taboo subject, this thing that we don't want to talk about, but by laughing about it, come closer to coming to grips with it, you know, and being honest with ourselves and with people close to us.
Do you feel like that's going to be easier coming out of this pandemic? I think you've said that people are like more inclined or more accepting of gallows humor right now to kind of get through this moment. Do you feel like there's this like sweet spot for that conversation right now?
I've noticed that in the virtual shows, because I wrote this. I've started writing the show like 2-3 years ago, but I've noticed that in the virtual shows is like people will laugh at some darker jokes. Like, I had this joke where I go like, I'm trying to remember it exactly, but I was researching all the ways people die, you know, like the strange ways. And one of them is like 1,000 something like 1,000 people a year die in accidents with lawnmowers or something like that. And, and I go, that's an easy eulogy to write, you know, like, Frank loved mulch, and now Frank is mulch, you know. It's so stupid, but like, that's a joke where like, coming into the pandemic, I feel like I would be like, oh, we're going to get some groans or whatever on that. And I find that people just they sort of like that sense of humor in this moment, because it's like that old idiom of like, you laugh so you don't cry.
Have doing comedy for Zoom, is it a far more insecure experience, or was it at the beginning and you've gotten used to it?
There's a disconnect and a connection, right? So like you don't have, like, Seinfeld always says, like, comedians have the timing of a drummer, you know. And it's like, you know, and there's a rhythm, and it's like a doom to doom to doom to doom, and there's the laughter that comes back. It's like doom to doom to doom to doom, and it's and with Zoom, it's I don't know. It's like I guess that's the old-fashioned internet sounds, but the rhythm is not there in the same way, so that part goes away. But on the other hand, and I'll show you camera 4 just to give you a sense of what I'm getting at here, is like, I have a 55-inch screen here and a 55-inch screen here, which means I'm looking at all of the audience members in their apartments at that moment. And so, and I can see their cats and their dogs and their kids, and they're in their kids' playroom and whatever, you know, like, cause it has the best internet, and it's so intimate that it's almost uncomfortable, which makes it comfortable.
That's really, really interesting. Yeah. My main thing, I was just trying to think of like the timing, cause I've seen some of the clips online where you hear an audience laughing, and I was just like, I'd be so stressed. When we do Zoom meetings for my staff, I get nervous. So even just like thinking of doing that to hundreds and thousands of people, it's just so vulnerable, especially because there is that delay. You're like, did it land? Okay, good.
Oh, and it is stressful. Like, there's no doubt about it. I get stressed every time we do it. I mean, even with the next one's called the Worldwide Comedy Pizza Party. We're doing 6 of them. I'll tell you the show I get most stressed about, the first show. Because every time I do it, it's all new material. This is the 7th one I've done. This is part 7.
Oh, wow.
So it's different from the material in the 6th, in the 5th, in the 4th, in the 3rd, in the 2nd, and the 1st. That's what I promise my audience members, basically, because my audience is is small but loyal.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, if you're going to be loyal, I will do my homework and I will write an entirely new show.
How long do you work on these shows, and how often do you work on several of them at the same time? Because I think it was in your conversation with Nathan Lane on your podcast, you talked about going to a bar and each night doing a completely different show, and maybe you hoped that people would come to each one, so they got to do Birbiglia experience each night. But I was like, how are you working on? Like, are you constantly workshopping hours and hours and hours of different specials?
Yeah, I would say like at any given moment, I'm workshopping about 4 or 5 hours of material.
Wow. Okay.
And with the hopes that it whittles down into like a 1 hour and 20 minute, 1 hour and 30 minute experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's, I don't know that. I mean, it's not everybody's process. Everybody has their own process, but it's, I don't know. I feel like you have to figure out, with my shows, it's the goal is to have it be a single story. And at the same time, I want it to be as funny as a typical stand-up comedy show. So that if you're tuning in to be like, oh, I like stand-up comedy, you go, oh, this is really funny. And if you tune in to watch a singular story, you go, oh, this is a really good story. So I want both of those groups of people to come away satisfied.
That's interesting.
But I don't explicitly advertise it that way, if that makes sense.
You're not. Yeah. No, that'd be people be like, why are you telling us this?
Yeah.
Hey, it's just me interrupting myself again to thank one of the sponsors of today's episode of A Conversation With, DoorDash. You know, as we move into spring and summer, and the hope for normalcy is getting bigger and bigger, some of us aren't ready or able to dine at a restaurant just yet. And that is exactly where DoorDash comes in. With over 300,000 partners in the United States, Puerto Rico, Canada, and Australia, you can support your local go-tos or choose from your favorite national chains. And ordering is so easy. Just open up the DoorDash app, you choose what you want to eat, and your food will be left safely outside your door with their new contactless delivery drop-off setting. So while you debate when and where your first in-person dining experiences will be, use DoorDash and don't miss out on the good food that's right next door. And for a limited time, our listeners can get 25% off and zero delivery fees on their first order of $15 or more when you download the DoorDash app and entering code DeFranco2021. It's 25% off up to a $10 value and zero delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter in code DeFranco2021. And just in case you somehow forgot, that's code DeFranco2021 for 25% off your first order with DoorDash. As always, subject to change and terms apply. But with that said, back to your podcast. Mike, I'm interested. Who would you see as, and it could be in the comedy space or it could just be in life, who are your three biggest mentors? And if you can share, what have you learned or are you learning from them?
So I would say my first mentor, it was in college. It was a man named John Glavin, who was my screenwriting professor and screenwriting and playwriting, and he sort of expanded my aperture in terms of understanding film and drama and theater, and actually he taught John Mulaney, who also went to Georgetown. He taught Jacqueline Novak, who went to Georgetown. He actually, believe it or not, his influence on cultural things runs deep because in my class was Jonah Nolan, who co-wrote the Batman films, who created Westworld, wrote The Prestige. He wrote, when I was in college with him, he wrote the short story that Memento was based on.
Wow.
That was one of my classmates. And by the way, really nice guy. And seemingly hasn't changed that much over the years. And was always really nice and wildly talented. But that was my first. John Glavin was my first mentor. If people are real nerds about the movie Memento, which is directed by Chris Nolan and is a wonderful film, the lead character's name is John G, which is in reference to John Glavin, who was our professor.
Wow. You do you have like a love for information like that? Is that correct? I know that was as far as like, it feels like you appreciate the worlds of entertainment. Once again, I'm going to keep going back to your conversation with Nathan Lane because you kind of talked to him about
his knowledge of everything Broadway and stuff like that. Do you feel like you have a similar love for the industry? It's not like you appreciate what came beforehand and you were a fan of it, and that kind of like impacted your own path?
It's funny. It's like I I don't think I have a love for the industry.
Okay.
Uh, I the business side of it I sort of despise. Um, and every time I go to I've never lived in Hollywood, which is why it's always so strange. And when I tweet something that's political and then it gets quoted in like a rundown of on one of these right wing sites of like, here's what Hollywood celebrities are saying about blah blah. It's like, I never lived in Hollywood. I'm barely a celebrity. We're really stretching now, and so the industry itself I don't have reverence for.
Sure.
The artists who've come before me, the film directors, the comedians, I absolutely have reverence for, because I feel like we all learn so much from these people. I mean, it's so there's that. And then to answer your question, are the three mentors. So then the next mentor that was quite significant is, Nathan Lane was extremely significant in terms of, he presented my first show, Sleepwalk with Me, off Broadway, and which became a feature film. And it was a huge vote of confidence, and really marked this pivot in my life where I don't know if you have this in your life where you think like there's before this and there's after this. Mm-hmm. And it was, for me, it was Sleepwalk with Me. It was Nathan Lane presenting Sleepwalk with Me off Broadway, because it went from people viewed me as a nightclub comedian to viewing me as someone who can create a show or an off-Broadway show or a piece of theater. And then, and it led to the book version, which is Sleepwalk with Me, the book. And so that was a huge thing. And then the third one is Ira Glass, who sort of helped me shape a lot of stories for This American Life. And then he produced both, two of my movies, Sleepwalk with Me and Don't Think Twice. And we've just made a lot of things. He was a producer on the new one. But I've had a ton of, I don't know, I crave mentorship, because I crave wisdom from people who know more than me. My director, Seth Barish, is like that. In some ways, my first mentor was my brother Joe, who's 5 years older than me, and we still work together. So there's a lot.
Yeah, have you found it easy or hard to be friends with people that you see as mentors? I was almost about to use the word idol, but that's a bit too much.
Yeah, it's complex. It's complex. I say this in the Nathan Lane episode, where I go, Nathan, I'm intimidated by you. You have to understand that, like, it's not just, I can comfortably pitch something to you. Like, there's a lot of weight to it, and there's a lot there. There's a pressure on it. So yeah, I feel like I don't know. I put a lot of weight on, I feel a lot of weight from the mentorships, but I also feel like I don't know. It's very important to me. Certainly, it's very perceptive of you to ask the question, because it is it's like a huge part of my life.
No, I have a friend that's like that, and I view them as a mentor, even if they don't see themselves as that. And but it's like it's also a little bit nice, because it's like, I don't know about you, but I don't find myself intimidated that often, or like careful, or like worried that they're going to take something I said the wrong way. Like everyone else I can kind of say something to, but then I'm like, if this person that I respect in this specific way thinks lesser of me, that would be such a nightmare. And so that's why I asked. Yeah.
I get that.
I'm interested then, because you talked about having a love for the artists and the art, but hating the industry. What is your relationship with money like?
It's funny. I'm confused. My first memory of money was I grew up in central Massachusetts, outside of Worcester, which is a pretty sort of blue collar part of Massachusetts, and So everyone I knew, my dad was a doctor, but everyone I knew, their parents were cops or firemen or firewomen and teachers and doctors, nurses, etc. And I always remember as a kid being worried about money and I can't even understand why. I mean, we weren't. It's just this. Like I remember asking my parents one night when I was like a young kid, like, are we gonna have enough money to like have food and stuff? And we were fine. We were fine. But like I definitely think like for whatever reason, you're definitely hitting on something that I was worried about at a young age, from something either I heard at school or from friends, parents, or whatever. And then yeah, I mean, I think money is significant in show business because for the most part, studios and networks have the money, and artists don't have the money. And so studios and networks historically have ended up with this sort of disproportionate amount of creative control because they have the money. And then what happens is the people with the vision, the artists, the directors, the writers, get pushed around by the people with the money, and it leads to, I believe, in my experience, what I've witnessed, things that just aren't as good as they could be. And so my goal, I have my own company, my own production company. We do everything that I do, and so it's about four of us. It's me and my brother Joe and Peter and Mabel, and like we sort of try to do everything soup to nuts so that we don't have to be beholden to someone else who has the money. And then the final thought I have on money is like, I'm so confused by people who want to have extraordinary amounts of money. I'm baffled by it.
Where's the line for extraordinary?
I think that what I'm pointing to specifically is like the 100 million, $1 billionaire, 100 millionaire, whatever it is. That number is so confusing to me because I just go like, I think there was like a happiness study a bunch of years ago where people go like there is a correlation between happiness and money, but it sort of recedes after like, I don't know, 140,000 a year or 110,000, whatever it was.
Yeah.
It was nothing like $100 million. Like it was nowhere near that. It might have been 80,000. Like, I don't even know what it was exactly, but I remember thinking like, man, these people who are trying to make $100 million, like, what is the end game there? Are they what is happening?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think there's something in people that can be fueled by my number's got to be bigger than this person's number.
Yes,
this is how I went in life. I was raised by, my dad was like a carpenter in the union. He had a side thing that like every Italian, you don't know if he's telling the truth or not. They have like the side thing that they do to make money. And I'm like, okay,
side thing.
I'm just going to believe you because why would I argue about this? But he was like, hustler, hustle, hustle. And then it was like, success in life is based around money. And so I had like a weird relationship with it because it was like this aspirational thing. But when I was young, I didn't have any of it. And my only kind of like relationship with people that had it were people that like made fun of me for having like shitty clothes, like Walmart clothes, right? And so I just hated everybody that had money. I thought they were all evil. And then I got it and I was like, oh, those are just shitty people. Those are just like really bad people. But yeah, I do think that there is a certain level where the money doesn't make you any happier. People that say that it doesn't bring happiness are stupid. I know what it's like to be incredibly poor.
Of course,
like,
yes.
There's a lot of fear there, uncertainty. Don't welcome that. But yeah,
yes.
But do you have like I've talked about this, I feel like, with almost every guest. Is there a number in your head where you're like, and I would do nothing ever, or it's always the art that drives you? Like this would be the amount where I'm like, I'm always just going to be a dad, and there's this other side hobby that I want to do, or no, work.
I don't have a number because I'm actually doing what I want to do.
I love
and
that.
This is sort of the goal. And what's funny is the the number that I calculate in my head whenever if I ever do, although I don't really do that, is what would keep the company afloat long enough such that we wouldn't have to make artistic compromises for X number of years to let's say make an independent film that we wanted to make, or make a stage show that we felt passionate about but wasn't going to make money.
Well, so what was with Sleepwalk with Me for the movie? Was that a movie that you made on your own and then sold, or what was the process there?
Oh my gosh! So what's funny is both movies I made, Sleepwalk with Me and Don't Think Twice, are movies where critically they did really well, at festivals they did really well. The people who love them. We're very fortunate that people get behind them. Neither of them made anyone a lot of money. They were both independently financed, and then ultimately, they did whatever. I don't know, 2 million. One of them did at the box office. One of them did 4 million at the box office. But nothing like this universe of movies that make 100 million, 500 million. It's like. But it's all, there's a fascinating thing in movies right now, I think, which is the kind, like Frank Oz was a guest on the show, on the Working It Out podcast, and I actually asked him about this specific thing with money and in relation to the kinds of comedies he makes. So he directed What About Bob, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Death at a Funeral, like all these movies that I love, and I feel like they just don't make, studios don't really make anymore. He made House Sitter. I mean, just endless amounts of great movies, great comedies. And then I think his answer had to do with, like, essentially that studios, the kind of money they want to make on a movie, they want it to make 100 million, 500 million, $1 billion, like they want it to make so much money. It's like, it's almost like what's happened in film in the last decade or 2 decades is almost like the Wall Streetization of art.
Well, in what way?
Which is to say that, or even the Silicon Valley occasion, to create a word, of art, which is to say that it's no longer good enough to make your money back. It's no longer good enough to make twice the money back. It's no longer, we want 10 times the money. We want 100 times the money. We want 5. And it's like, to what end? I don't know. Like, it just, again, it gets back to sort of it's insatiable seemingly.
Yeah, and I mean, there's always going to be, like, when people ask, like, how much do you want to make, I think the true answer for a lot of people is more. That's it. And you see that get to a kind of an ugly place. But so you would, right now, you think if you had a route for things like this, just self-fund and because you might end up just losing a lot of money, right?
Well, that's the joke that Nathan says is in The Producers.
Oh, The Producers, yeah.
Is the 2 rules of show business. Rule 1, don't use your own money. Rule number 2, don't use your own money. Whatever it is. I think I'm saying it slightly wrong, but it's that you get the idea.
Yeah.
But I completely defy that rule constantly. I'm financing everything I do. And it's just because I didn't get into this so that I could work for Disney.
You're going to have like a Disney Plus special in the next 3 years. They're going to play this clip. They'll be like, look at this man. You're going to join the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Netflix or whatever. I mean, there's nothing wrong with those places. It's just I didn't.
Sure.
I got into this because I had a impulse to create something that's special and meaningful to me. And so if that means that I finance it myself and it doesn't make a ton of money, that seems fine to me as long as I can keep going.
Yeah. I will say one of the weird things is, because obviously you expect a studio to go, I want more money, but I feel like we as consumers have, like, been trained over the last however many years
well, I would say maybe it feels like 5 to 10 that we judge a movie's success maybe almost even more by how much money it makes. Like we as a consumer, it's
you're not
wild.
wrong. Yeah.
And it's like
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's become a symbol of status. How much money a movie makes, which is very strange.
well, it's even like I saw what was it? Avatar is like coming out again in China, and then there are people freaking out. They're like, wait, so Marvel's no longer gonna, or it was wait, it's the same company now, right? It's the same people that make Avatar made Endgame. Am I right there? I don't know. I don't care.
I don't know.
But it's just like, but that like fans lost their mind. They're like, that's not fair that it's coming out again. Like, Endgame had it, and I was just like, but like, it's not going to make you enjoy the movie less. It doesn't mean anything. Very few people look back and go like, Avatar was anything other than like a really big advance in technology. Right. That was the big thing. It was like,
it's actually exactly how I think about that movie.
Yeah. It was like a giant, expensive test case. And also,
whereas The Matrix to me was a breakthrough, not only in technology, which it was, but also in the types of stories people were interested in telling on the screen and watching on the screen.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Like for me, like The Matrix was this huge epiphany moment, even as a viewer, of like, wow, you can tell stories like this on the screen like that. It was. I don't know if it was. I might be wrong. Like it might not have been that for culture. It might have been 5 movies before that did that. But for me, that's what it was.
No, I think if I try and remember, I think I worked at a theater at that point. I remember it being a moment. Like it was this wild thing. But also there are sometimes just like stories that stick with people. It's kind of like you had The Matrix, and then oh shoot, how am I going to forget The Truman Show? I feel like everyone walked out of The Truman Show going like, I've always in the back of my head thought like, what if I'm the main character of this thing?
Sure.
And so obviously not a technological marvel comparatively, but it just a movie that there's a moment in time where it's this different special thing. So I appreciate things like that.
Yeah, it's those are both like, I feel like, seminal films.
Hey, we're just going to take a second and pay some bills and let you know about one of the fantastic sponsors of today's show, Public, and more specifically, publicdefranco.com. You know, if you're looking to invest in the stock market, no matter how big, no matter how small, I highly recommend Public. I personally switched over to Public after not having the best experience or happiness with one of their competitors. So I downloaded Public and I instantly fell in love with it. Because with Public, not only did I get all the tools that I wanted, the information that I wanted, but Public also made the stock market social. It turned out to be really awesome, also very helpful to share and learn new ideas and ways to invest with a social community of investors. When I say any amount of money, I mean that. They have features like fractional investing, which, if you didn't know, allows you to buy stocks in small slices. That way, if, for example, you want some Tesla or Amazon stock, you can get it without spending big. And it also allows you to have a greater variety of stocks with the money that you have right now. And I mean, you can start small. You can invest $1, $5, $50 or more and own fractions of all the companies that you love. And all while Public has 0 commission fees on standard trades, which is huge. And best of all, if you go to publicdefranco.com right now, you will receive a free stock once you open an account. You don't have to invest anything. You get free stock. We get paid for sending you. It is a win-win. And so just go to publicdefranco.com if you're planning on your future right now. You get a free stock. They pay us for sending you. It is a win-win. So go to publicdefranco.com and start planning for your future today. But with that said, back to your podcast.
Mike, we're gonna shift gears, and this is always a bit of a win-lose situation. We're gonna try and include some questions from fans.
Oh yeah, great.
So
the ones I saw on Twitter so far, I thought were really good.
You know what? You mentioned it, so we'll start there. Constant Connell says, did his getting T-bone situation change after the special, or was it a done deal by that point?
Oh, that's a good question. So that's a reference to My Girlfriend's Boyfriend, which is on Netflix, and it's a story where I was T-boned. I was hit. My car was hit driver's side like a T-bone steak, and I was nearly killed. And then in this weird turn of events, I was made to pay for the other driver's car. And no, I had to ultimately pay for this guy's car, and it was infuriating, but it was one of those things that was causing me an extraordinary amount of a sort of mental health pain because I couldn't let go of it. I was just researching the accident report and all this stuff. And in the special, you can see I actually bring the accident report projected behind me on the screen, and I go, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then right here you can see this, and it really was driving me mad. And no, I mean, nothing changed from the special, but it did. That was a really pivotal moment in my life of this idea of letting go of something where that ending line of the special is I paid for the guy's car. And a few months later, Jen and I went to City Hall and got married. I still didn't believe in the idea of marriage, and I still don't, but I believe in her, and I've given up on the idea of being right. And that was, so I mean, that was the lesson in all of it.
See, if you asked why make $100 million, I think it's so you can
So you
ruin
can
that
just pay
guy's
things like
life.
that.
No, you've ruined that guy's life in a lot of like obscure ways.
That's absurd. This is revealing a very vindictive streak in you, Phil.
If I had $100 million, I would. The problem with me, I know you said stay away from politics. The problem with me with Trump is I identify with certain personal traits that I do not like in myself. If I should never be president, because I would do everything in my power at that point to ruin everyone that's ever wronged me. I do it in ways that my name wasn't attached to it, but because what do you do with that amount of power? Like that's I should never be president because I would want to be a dictator. Like
I don't think but I don't think that serves you well. I'll tell you why. This is the Central Massachusetts kid in me talking. Is even if you're being vindictive, let's say if you had $100 million and you're getting back at this guy who hit you in your car, it's like it's gonna come back at you in some way. There will be collateral damage. You're throwing a punch, and that punch is coming back.
I don't know. Like I feel like with $100 million, that's a different boxing glove.
I don't know.
$100 million is
I'm telling you, Phil.
$100 million is you wearing brass knuckles and headgear, and this person is asleep. They're just asleep on a couch. That's the fight. But yes, no, but also I feel like I'm not the worst version of myself because I have people around me that go, maybe that's not a good idea. What does that serve you? What does that serve you? Let's see.
Wait, I'm going to throw the question back at you. What is your number that you feel like you could give up your life and profession for?
Well, so I feel like this has come up. I'm just fascinated with people's relationships with money because it's really all over the place. I've joked that I would love to start a GoFundMe with a goal of $20 million from everyone that dislikes me. And like that tells me to like shut the fuck up and like stay in my lane. And I'd be like, well, if you give me $20 million, I'll go away. But if I had to have like a boss, that number is like it gets to 50 to 100. To like because you probably don't know this about me. 5-6 years ago, I actually sold my channels at that time. And as far as like you talked about like there was you kind of existing and then something happened and then this is your life different from that moment.
Sure.
At that moment, it was like a big deal because nothing like that had ever been done in our space. I was all of a sudden, even though like looking at how things are valued today, I really undersold those channels at that time. People thought I was like this fucking genius and I'm like this astute businessman, but really all I did was I locked myself into having a boss for 4 or 5 years and like security rather than me being able to have control, which was a mistake. And I eventually got to a point where I was able to talk them into selling my stuff back. But wait, what was the what was the initial question? Sorry,
the money question, throwing the money question back at you, but I'm learning so much.
So I would because at that point that's generational wealth, and that's when we talk about money on the show, I have a weird relationship with it because now that I have it, I hate the fact that just by having it you get more of it without any effort. Right, because that's like that goes completely against how we were all raised.
Sure,
right? It was like hard work,
yeah,
and it's like nope, it's just having it. And then that's how you keep more of it while other people, suffer. And so that's where I have like a really rough relationship with it. But
And when I was
Wow.
asking you about it, like you said what you said, but the main standout to me is, okay, out of all the different relationships you could have, it felt like power. Power, your relationship to money is power. And that if you don't have it,
Yeah,
you don't have the
control.
power.
I think
Okay.
of it as control.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because power can have like a negative connotation. It's like the smacking down.
Yes.
But yeah, the control, the stability. I think that's a healthy one. But yeah, for me, 20 to 50.
Wow. That's fascinating to me.
But that's also like I love what I do, but I would love to focus on different aspects of it. Like the last 4 years of covering the news was it hurt. Like it made me
Yeah.
feel alienated from a portion of my audience. It made me alienated
Sure.
from it was just hard because it was like I was someone that prided myself on being like non-biased, and then you realize like reality
Sure.
has a bias, and like being fair isn't treating everything the same because it's not. And so like I had to go through this like really painful thing because I had been critical of people that critical of people for being what I ended up becoming. And so yeah, it's I don't know. I I have a weird relationship with the news. So that's why I even have a number. Because I actually more prefer
Yeah.
stuff like this, like not to geek out too much and put myself in an inferior position, but like I've been a fan of yours for a really, really long time. I was excited about the conversation because I get to, unlike the news, which is like a different version of the same thing constantly, I get to walk away from this conversation having learned something about you, or maybe even thinking about something in my life from a different angle. And so like that makes me excited because I actually get to, it's the same reason why having a mentor is so great, is like feeling like there's someone else in the room that can give you a lot of stuff if you have to ask the right questions.
Sure.
Yeah. And I also like to rant a lot.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Here we go. Let's go back. Travis Byram says, any stories at all about making Don't Think Twice one of the most underrated comedies of the last decade? Is that when someone says something's underrated, are you like, most people really liked it? What are you talking about?
You know why it's underrated? Because it didn't make $100 million.
That's what they're talking about.
That's what they mean, because it's 98% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I was
it's
like,
well rated
yeah.
by critics. I appreciate them saying that, because whenever people say they like Don't Think Twice, it means so much to me, because it was this huge collaboration between myself and my cinematographer Joe Anderson and Keegan Michael Key and Gillian Jacobs and all these people who I care about so much, and we all care about the movie so much. Like, it was such a labor of love to tell this story about this improv group where someone gets cast on like a Saturday Night Live type of show, and everyone else doesn't, and about what happens in life when people realize that not everything is fair, and life isn't fair in the way that we envision it when we're kids. And I'm trying to think of a good story from it that I haven't told. I mean, there's so many stories there's so many synchronicities that happen. Like, for example, I hired Liz Allen, who taught me improv when I was in college. One of the greatest improv teachers alive. But I asked her if she would come in and teach our fake improv group, which is called the Commune, how to improvise as a group and create group mind and all these things. And a lot of improv has to do with like creating like group mind and synchronicity and all these things. And the big thing was Liz needed to teach Gillian Jacobs, one of the leads, how to improvise, because she had not taken improv classes before, even though she's a extraordinarily experienced actor. And one day in improv workshops, Liz said to Gillian, "Where are you from?" And Gillian said, "Pittsburgh." And Liz said, "I am too." And Liz said, "What part of town?" She said, "This part of town." "Me too." "What street?" "Such and such a street." "Me too." "What house?" Says the house. "Me too." They grew up in the same house.
Wait, what?
Liz Allen and Gillian Jacobs, in different generations, Liz Allen's mom had sold their house after Liz grew up to Gillian's mom.
Oh wow. Okay, so I thought you were saying they were doing a bit in the workshop, and I was like,
No.
that's not a joke.
No, in real life.
Wow.
So in other words, we were trying to develop chemistry. Meanwhile, this ultimate synchronicity had taken place, which is they had grown up in the same house, in the same bedroom, in the same house.
That's so weird.
Isn't that so wild?
But it's also something that I never think about. Like, we just sold our house and there are new people in it, and they're just like adopting spaces that we used or didn't use.
Sure.
But I don't even know. I would almost feel weird having a conversation with someone that occupied the same sleeping space. I don't know if it would connect to me. I'd be like, it's almost like we found we have this,
Get me out of here.
Weird DNA bond. I don't know why I'm having that reaction.
That's a story we've almost never told, but I was trying to think of something that we hadn't told as a story.
I was like, for a second, I was like, Mike, this bit makes no sense. I don't know what the joke is. I don't get it.
That's funny.
Okay, we got Minnesota Joe, who says, okay, will comedians struggle with making jokes without the Trump administration? Are there implications they have to consider? I don't know. I wonder when it will kind of ramp down. I feel like it's already done it. Like, there was the initial year where everyone's like, are we all in the same fucking reality show movie?
Yes.
And then I don't know. What do you think?
I think that there's been a vast misunderstanding of jokes during the Trump administration by consumers of comedy who think that comedians were glad that we had Trump. Meanwhile, we all hated it. You can never say we all, but like a vast majority of comedians hated that Trump was in office because he's such an exaggeration of a person. He's such a shallow, two-dimensional person that it's actually not that interesting to caricature him because he is a caricature. And so the work is already there. And also he delegitimizes truth. That's part of what he does. He says things like fake news, et cetera, to try to delegitimize truth, and like dictators do. And the problem with that for comedians is if there are no accepted truths, there are no setups, because setups of jokes are true. There are things that we all accept to be true, and then there's a right turn, and that's what the punchline is. So if we can't agree on the setups, we can't agree on the punchlines. And so it was 4 years of, I would say, cognitive dissonance with audience members about what was true, and as a result, what was funny.
So do you feel like that's why you're going now with comedy to pizza? You're like, this is a thing that we're all on the same page for, right? We got pizza at least, right?
Phil, I was always for pizza. I mean, I've been doing pizza. I've been doing pizza jokes in literally everything I've ever done has had. I've ever made, every special, everything has a pizza reference, and now I'm just going 100% in on what's probably going to end up. We're doing it as a virtual show, but it'll probably end up being like a pizza comedy special.
I like to think that you have a running thing in everything you make. It's like, if you look at every frame of anything Birbiglia has ever made, there is a shot of a pizza somewhere in the background.
It's like Brad Pitt eating a sandwich or whatever.
I'm gonna jump to this card game that I have. Mike, other than when you went through that window and almost died that way, what's the moment other than that you've come closest to dying?
Well, it's funny because the other one was referenced, which was me being T-boned by a drunk driver.
The other thing you just mentioned 10 minutes ago that I completely...
What's the other thing of the other thing of the other thing? I had a bladder tumor when I was 19, and they took out this tumor. And it was a malignant tumor, but it didn't spread. And it was just one of these things where I just got so lucky.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's any number of scenarios where I would just not be alive anymore based on that.
Do you feel like with the different ways that your body is trying to kill itself and strangers ramming into your car, have you ever thought about like what
your funeral will be like, or no?
Oh gosh. You know, I feel like it's crossed my mind before, and certainly my new show is all about mortality and death and everything that I'm working on. It's something I've considered, but one of the things that I find silly about funerals is the embalming process. Like, it just seems like, what are we doing here? You know, because it's not like when you see someone embalmed, they don't look good. You know, it's like, if we're being honest, like, you know, the person looks puffy. You know what I mean? Like, they don't look like a great version of themselves. Like, I feel like if we're gonna go embalmment, I would go taxidermy.
Just keep them
I
around.
would be like, I'd love to see my friend, if my friend Rajiv passed away, I'd love to see him like catching a football. You know what I mean? Like, just a moment, a glory-filled moment.
I like that. Yeah, rather than just in a box
Yeah.
and then you close the door. Yeah. I don't know. I can't envision the actual event, but I thought about it recently, and I was like, I need once I can get out of this lockdown, in addition to just me craving to be around other people, I need to just like befriend more people, because I would almost I'm gonna be gone. It doesn't matter. But I'm like, in my head, I would be embarrassed if not that many people showed up. And like,
That's
I
hilarious.
feel like I'm gonna ask my wife to just like over invite.
That's really funny. Hire extras.
Yeah, because I was like, which I think that's a thing. I don't know if it's a thing that's been joked about in shows, and I've just I've gone, yeah, that's probably a thing.
No, I think that's very funny. I think that's a very fertile territory for comedy.
Actually, so maybe related. Mike, when was the last time you cried, and why?
Oh gosh, a good question. I think the last time I remember crying was when I watched the filmed version that Frank Oz directed of In and of Itself by Derek Delgadio. So it's on Hulu if people want to watch it. It's this. I mean, Derek is a storyteller and a magician and just a general sort of interesting design artist, and he creates this very, very personal story. Very personal story, and directed by Frank Oz. And in it, there's something about it that I was I lost it. I was just crying and crying, and I had seen it. What's amazing is I had seen it before. I had seen it twice.
Wait, so when was this last time?
It was so the movie came out, I think, a month ago or so.
Oh, okay. I was like, I didn't know if like you had not cried in years, but okay.
No.
Do you find it hard to, or it there's like certain things, like for me, I feel like I don't, and then a Pixar movie can just randomly hit me, like just completely unwrap me.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I cried during the last Pixar movie, Soul, also.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I completely lost it on that at the end. That final moment is incredible. And then, of course, Pete Docter's other movie, Up, I cried and cried.
Well, right from
like
the get-go,
basically
they
the first
smack you in the
5
face.
minutes.
Yeah.
The first 5 minutes of that one, I cried.
Did you watch Soul with your daughter?
No. I don't think you could show it to a 6-year-old.
Oh, well, I'm a bad parent then.
Did you show it to your 6-year-old?
Yeah. And we cried together, and he like looked to me and he was like,
wow.
He's like, "Don't worry, Daddy, it's a happy cry." And then I just
Oh my
hugged him even
gosh, oh my
more. I was like,
gosh.
"Oh." And
oh my gosh.
because for me, that's
she gets scared when, like, you know, kids on a soccer team and a show like disagree about something. So like I don't think she could handle Soul at this point.
You're like, I don't want to talk about the concept of death. Well, we've had that conversation open because initially I what was it? I was like, you know what? One of the first times I ever had like sat down and was like, okay, Trey, my son, you can watch YouTube, and I leave for 20 minutes because I'm like, you know what? What's the worst? What would happen with the recommendation engine? And within 20 minutes, he's on this like horrifying, scary thing where this like monster like kills people, and I was just like, okay, so we're gonna have that conversation about death. Let's do it, because I'm a bad parent, and I decided to walk away for 20 minutes. But yeah, it's have you had the death conversation with your daughter yet? Like, has she asked about it?
We've definitely talked about it. Like, because kids, kids fixate on it. She'll go like, is Bob Dylan dead? Well, no, but he's older. Kind of thing. Are the Beatles dead? Well, some of them. You know what I mean? Like, it is whatever. Like, it's always like in relation to pop culture, or is Rosa Parks dead? Yeah, Rosa Parks is dead. Like it's just like history and culture and all that stuff.
It's a little bit weird because I was raised Catholic. Walked away when I was 12 because the church stood by dogs don't go to heaven, which apparently when I was 12 was just like my breaking point.
That's the line.
I was like, not on my watch.
Yeah.
And so my son, he'll ask me things about like spirits and ghosts and heaven, and I'm just like, yeah, I mean, some people do. Some people think that. And he's like, what do you think? And I was like, I don't think that. But and I'm just like, I don't know how. I'm like, I want to give you peace. This is the one thing I didn't think about when becoming a father. I was like, how do I give you this peace? Because I remember until I was like 22, I was fixated on death. I don't know what it was. Like just and like the random things. I'd have these exaggerated, ridiculous fears about black holes and nukes going off. And these grand things, even though it'll be like a heart attack, like with so many other people. But I don't. And then, did you find this in your life that then you just got too busy to think about it, or
you got too busy to think about it? Well, certainly, like, whatever your addiction is, if you have one, mine, if you're drinking or doing drugs or playing, bowling too often or whatever, mine is work, and definitely it's a distraction from the larger questions. Which are that we're all in denial of death all the time because we're surrounded by it. We're literally, I mean, in the pandemic, the 500,000 people have died just from that. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I mean, we all have, and then we, show up and
and then we just talk about
to Phil DeFranco, and we talk about movies.
It is kind of weird that we just like we talk about things like that. I can be like, it's kind of crazy that Tom Brady got a 7th ring. And it's like, and there's 500,000 people that have died from this one thing. It's crazy.
Yeah, and like even beyond that, if you want to get really dark, like 500,000 people who like died, and like so many of them like were not able to say goodbye to their families.
Yeah,
or had to FaceTime, or it's on a screen or whatever it is. I mean, the ripple effect emotionally of this year, I think for decades to come is going to be profound.
Yeah, but it'll. I'm like trying to think of a silver lining. I'm like, it'll inspire good art.
Well, I would like to think that it will lead more children to think, oh, the heroes are the doctors and the nurses and the first responders and scientists who tried to cure the virus or help people who had the virus. And because I think that culturally right now we're at this sort of inflection point where kids, it's calling the kettle black, but it's like kids want to be famous a lot, or they want to be in entertainment or on camera or whatever it is. And it's like, I would love it if we were able to have an inflection point that moved us towards this idea of, no, actually, what's more interesting or noble or honorable is to try to do something that's not about yourself, that's about helping other people.
Well, I will say, I mean, I've seen some early reports that they called it like the Fauci effect, where there are more people than previously that have been going towards the medical field. And there's also been, I believe I have to double check this second one, but I believe there's also been a number, like a spike in people going to school for journalism, which I think is, I hate using the word because it's not like they're going into like they're like mining coal or running into a burning building, but it feels very brave because if there is a group of people that's been like really persecuted more and more, as far as like a job, it's that, and so to go, I'm still going to try to be part of the solution. That's that's so huge. I get excited about that, but
Yeah, that is good.
but I don't know if I think we might be trying to trick ourselves if we're like, and it's going to fully inspire something better. I think we'll have a better idea the next, let's say 6 years. We'll go there. That'll be the
Yes, I think
Mike.
that's safe to say.
Something I do every now and then when I close is to switch it to you, and maybe it'll be easier because I know that you have your own podcast and you have your kind of like set of questions. What question would you want to ask me? And I know I have like 5 more minutes with you.
So my question that I would want to ask you is, you were at the forefront of the sort of like YouTube, I would say YouTube generation. You were a trailblazer in this sort of universe. And I would say, since you know the landscape and understand the landscape in a way that I really don't understand that landscape, do you think that where we're headed is something where YouTube hosts and channels make, the standard network talk shows irrelevant or less relevant?
Ooh, I mean, I think that there'll always be a place for both. Like whenever, even 5-10 years ago, when the internet was like getting bigger and bigger and the shows were getting bigger and bigger, and they're like, oh, it's going to kill TV. I feel like anyone that could kind of go, well, no, when you have that much money, you'd have to really, really misstep to fuck it up, that there would be an evolution, there'd be kind of like a merging, there'd be acquisitions. So no, and I mean, you look to the late night shows, right? They have massive online presences to make themselves relevant in that way. And I think more than ever, people have realized it can just be also big here. It doesn't need to drive to live viewing. At the end of the day, a view is a view. Figure out how to monetize it best. So I don't think it'll ever replace it. I do think that we won't see. I think the feather in the hat of getting like a TV show gets smaller and smaller. Like when you have the
Yes.
when you have like the Lily
Yes.
Sings of the world getting into late night, that is something to take notice of. But it's not. I don't think it has to be the end goal anymore. I think if you have a
Yeah.
podcast and you can clip it up, and each of those things is going to get several 100,000 views, the whole thing several 100,000 views. You compare that to what late night viewership has been in the past decade, and it's competitive. The only thing that is not as competitive has been the money, and the money in the internet space has been slowly catching up. For things that are more standard, like podcasting, the conversion rates are always lower, but what I've found is that the money has gotten bigger because it's more standard, it's more understood. And in a world of, people are big on Instagram, not for their ability to move, but because they did like a funny thing, and no one knows the true value of things. It's a little bit of a mess. It'll all get figured out. But
Yeah.
I think it's just it's the great evolution of the things. I mean, I've been doing it for 15 years and it still feels
Yeah.
very much early on. And I don't know. I'm excited by it, but I've always been on the outside of it. I've always stayed away from like the agents and the managers and stuff like that. Cause like you said, I like to just have full control, and I'm not, I also don't collaborate well. So
Why'd you get into it? Why'd you get into it so early?
Well, I'll try not to super speak ill of the dead, but I was actually inspired to start talking because I saw a clip of Rush Limbaugh talking about Michael J. Fox, and it infuriated me. He talked about like him exaggerating his condition, and
I've seen that clip.
and I was just like, how can this just be a thing? And I think it was one of my first videos, and I kind of just ranted on it. It wasn't the version of my show now, and I made like a kind of a horrible Dane Cook ripoff thing. Like as far as like I didn't have a presence, or you kind of mimic people early on. And for he was at his like prime when I was late in high school and early college, and I was like, storyteller. And then slowly I found my voice. But it was initially from that, but it was also like no one cared about the news when I was in high school. I cared about it, and I was like a loser. And I was like, who can I talk to about world events? And so I went to the internet because also I didn't have any fucking money. I was working full time at Outback Steakhouse, and I was like maxing out credit cards and loans just to go to school for a degree I never got because I switched to YouTube. But I barely had enough money to eat, and so I would just use usually school internet to watch YouTube videos. And then I coded a website for these guys. I didn't even know how to code beforehand. I just put myself in the position and then like learned online.
Wow.
And I coded a website and gave me enough money to get my first horrible webcam. And I started making videos.
Yeah.
And here we are 15 years later, which is, it's weird.
That's incredible.
But yeah, I mean, I think I read that you started writing jokes when you were 16, but like, what really got you into it? What made you go like, I know you've probably answered this question a bunch of times, but I don't think I've ever seen it. What got you into comedy?
Yeah, so I saw Stephen Wright, the comedian, live at the Cape Cod Melody tent when I was 16, and he has an economy of words in his jokes that is so extraordinary that I was sort of mystified by it. It was almost like seeing a magic trick, where I was going, oh, wow. And then sort of going like, oh, I think I could do that magic trick kind of thing. And then I started writing in my notebook, and which I think is the great sleight of hand actually of good comedians is that they make you think that you could do it too. And you're like, oh, I could do that. And then you start writing, you're like, oh, this isn't nearly as good as his stuff. And so that, and then 10 years later, I ended up getting half decent at it. But yeah. And so then I went to college, and I entered the funniest person on campus contest, and I won that. And I think in some ways that was a huge epiphany moment because there was like 500, 600, maybe 700 people in the audience. And it got me the chance to perform at the Washington, D.C. Improv. And I opened for Dave Chappelle. And so it was like a professional show where people had paid for tickets. And I opened this is of course way before the Chappelle show. This is around the time he did Half Baked. And it was just this moment where I just thought, yeah, I'm behind the curtain. I'm walking behind the curtain to get on stage at the DC Improv, and it just felt like this is where I want to be.
I love that. Mike, I thank you for the time, man. It's been I'm so glad I finally got you on. I thought I asked you to be on last year, and I've realized we've had the worst back and forth conversation since 2013.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, like we message each other about different things, and then the other person
Yes.
doesn't answer for 2 years.
Because I think because it's on Twitter, and I'm terrible on DMing on Twitter. It's the worst.
No, yeah, there was like a thing where you messaged me about a special in 2014, and then I, without acknowledging that I just didn't respond, messaged you back in 2015. I was like, hey, do you want to be on a podcast?
Oh my gosh.
And then you said, I'd love to. I just joined the Fathers Club. Any parenting advice? To which I did not respond to you.
That's hilarious. Well, I think we covered it all today.
Yeah, we got it. But Mike, I appreciate you.
Let's do it again soon. This is really fun.
Yeah, I love it.